just to kick in. Okay, that's us. So Walter Brogan.
I'm here.
Archie Buchanan. No. Janine Cleekes. No. Mary Donnelly. No. Grant Ferguson.
Here.
Eric Holford.
I'm here.
Martin Lennon.
He's not here.
No. Monique McAdams.
Here.
And Jared Wark.
Here.
Thank you. And officers present today are Jackie Taylor, Lorena Hagan, Derek Craig and myself, Carol Lyon. I'll hand back to yourself, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, Carol. So we'll just get down to business then. So is there any declaration of interest? Nope. Okay, excellent. Moving on to number 2 then, the minutes of previous meeting. Does anybody get any questions or anything they want to raise? Fantastic. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second it.
Cheers, Walter. Okay, we'll just move on then to item 3A. So this is our first of the items for monitoring. Okay, so this is the General Fund Cattle Programme. It's on pages 7 to 26. And Jackie and Derek will take us through it. So over to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So as Chair's explained, this is our General Fund Capital Programme paper. This has taken us to the 1st of January this year. Section 5 covers the financial implications, and it reports that we have a programme for our capital projects this year of £80.6 million. There's some comments around section 5.3 around our accounting requirements, and it reports that some of our expenditure that we have in capital at the moment should be technically recorded as revenue, as they're not filling the full criteria of being capital. So therefore some budget will move over to revenue to pay for those costs. And conversely, there are some costs in revenue that will transfer over to capital. All the same works will still be carried out, it's just the appropriate place for that spend to lie. So there's no impact around funding. Section 5.6 covers our expected outturn for the year, and this is a feature in both the capital and the revenue side of the reports today. So our outturn is our projection for the year, and what we're reporting here is that if we exclude COVID, our expected position for our resource capital projects is an underspend of £5.7 million. So before I get into the detail of that, we'll just cover the COVID aspect of capital. You may remember that we have an element in our budget this year for costs associated with COVID at £7.891 million. Current estimates are at the moment anticipated at £6.6 million, which leaves us £1.3 million of budget that will be available to support any further COVID costs in relation to capital, should they materialise. We'll keep you posted on that. Moving back to the resource capital projects position, I reported a second ago that we were expecting an underspend of around £5.7 million, and that's attributable mainly to projects in community and enterprise resources, education, housing and tech, and some smaller amounts across finance and corporate and social work. And there's an appendix, which I'll come to in a second, which shows those projects affected. Now, the vast majority of this is just due to timing, as is the norm with capital projects, and rather than spending money in this current financial year, that will actually slip into 21-22. Obviously, the funding will follow that, and those projects will complete with the budgets available. At section 513, we're reporting on the position to date, or to the 1st of January, and at that point in time we had spent just over £40 million. And again, the appendices show some of the details. So if I just move on to the appendices, on page 11, at Appendix A, there was one adjustment that was made to the capital programme at last week's Executive Committee, and that was in relation to Our Lady of Lourdes and the acquisition of that building. So £627,000 has been added to the programme. Page 12 in Appendix B just shows the usual information around the resource budgets, the split of our capital programme, and how they lie across each additional resource. And then in Appendix C, we've got that information but broken down in a little bit more detail across actual services. And you can see at the bottom right-hand side of that table, the spend that I reported a second ago to the 1st of January of just over £40 million. Page 14, Appendix D, covers the funding of the capital programme. And again, I know you're all well versed in this, but the main source of funding for our capital programme is through borrowing, and it's through capital grant that we get from the government. And that's detailed there for your information. And then Appendix E is an appendix that I referred to a second ago, which shows the projects where spend will continue into 21-22 with the funding following it. And that's where we're seeing our underspends in this current financial year. Page 16 starts to move on to the physical progress, and I'll hand over to Derek to take us through that.
Thanks, Jackie. On page 16 then, the Build Executive Summary for period 10 report shows that there's no projects behind in build. In the non-build over the page, there are 7 projects identified on the summary as being behind programme. And if we jump to page 19, there's a list of those projects. I'll just quickly run down them. The extension of cemeteries and landworks behind programme due to land acquisition for Douglas Cemetery not progressing as anticipated. At Abington Campus for Enterprise, the project's been delayed while awaiting confirmation of additional funding from Scottish Government. At Hamilton Hub, the New Cross Shopping Centre, funding for this project was awarded in November, but due to COVID restrictions, elements of the work will now fall into 21-22. The Town Centre Regeneration Fund has also been impacted by the COVID restrictions, and the works for that will now fall into 21-22. Education, Information, Communication Technology Solutions for Learning also has been impacted by COVID restrictions, including access to schools. The works have been rescheduled and fall into 21-22 financial year. The IT infrastructure refresh has been impacted by COVID, and the remainder of the works will now fall into 21-22. And lastly, the new website, CRM and customer portal has also been impacted by the COVID restrictions, so some elements of the project will now fall into the new financial year 21-22. Moving over the page to the roads summary, there's no projects identified in roads for that period as being behind. And that's the update for Capital General Services.
That's excellent. Thanks very much, Derek. Thank you very much, Jackie. We'll just open it up for questions then. Okay, hold on, I'll see who was first. Eric, you've got your hand up first, then I'll take Grant.
I thought it was Grant, but only a quick question anyway, so it won't take long. Just the Abington Campus for Enterprise on page 19, is that all up and running now? I mean, the build, not the completion, obviously.
Derek.
Sorry, Chair. I believe so, yes, it was commencing on site in January. So the works have commenced.
No more hold-ups so far?
Not at the moment.
Okay, brilliant, cheers.
Thank you. And I'll take Grant. And just to let you know, Eric, it comes up, if you click on your participants, it actually shows you who put their hand up first. So you must have just pipped them to the post. Anyway, Grant, carry on, sorry.
Thank you. So page number 16.
Okay.
Apologies, 19. IT infrastructure, the refresh. Can you give me more information about that? I'm a bit concerned about that because of there's been issues with IT for the councillors trying to get online. People are bringing laptops into the office and logging on, and there's been issues. So I'm really concerned about that. And obviously, you know, I don't want there to be more issues going on. So this morning, for example, one of the councillors was trying to access the meeting and was having real problems with it. There was problems with the audio, not being able to hear her. So I don't know if it's a network issue, if it's an internal issue. It says that the IT infrastructure refresh. Can you maybe give me more details about what that actually is? What is
okay. No problem at all. Jackie, who is best to answer that? Would it be you or Derek?
It would be myself rather than Derek. However, what I don't have to hand is all of the individual projects that capital spend was going to incur. What I think I can give Councillor Ferguson some comfort on is that the works that are undertaken under the infrastructure project are in direct relation to laptops. It's not about like a refresh of equipment. It's more about, and I'm going to use a dead technical term, the undergubbings of the IT world. So I think that's twice in 2 days I've used that word. That's my technical knowledge. It's more about the parts of IT that we never see, and I don't believe they would be causing any of the concerns that Councillor Ferguson's raised. However, I will take it back to our IT experts and get more information if that would help Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, because it's very interesting, you know, thinking about the future with IT and how that will work. You know, I know that obviously changes happen really, you know, ongoing very fast, and we don't want to be left behind. We want to make sure that, you know, we're up there with everyone else, and make sure that it's, you know, working well for our business side. And in terms of the infrastructure, I know obviously you're right in what you're saying in terms of the laptop, but, you know, we have to think about firewalls, you know, the Wi-Fi connection, access points, so all of the things that's included in, you know, the network, and want to make sure that that's improved over time and that we're not falling behind.
I think that's all really relevant points. The other thing I would say is we'll find out if Jackie's undergubbings, seen as she's now said that twice in our last 2 meetings, we'll now know if that's going to replace Michael McGlynn's legacy hand. So. Excellent. Right. Okay. Oh, Eric, have you got another question, or do you have a legacy hand?
I don't have a legacy hand. I just put it back up again.
Okay.
Just a quick question. The pages 21 following, the statements of, you know, where everything's at, are they as at the 1st of January? Is that, I can't see a date on them, but that's just being dim. Would that be correct?
Sorry, Councillor Holford, you're absolutely correct. It says at the top of the page, period 10.
Yes, exactly.
But isn't the most helpful to anybody that doesn't know our accounting periods, and it is the 1st of January.
I've only been at this 4 years, I'm afraid.
No, I wouldn't. I absolutely wouldn't expect you to know. I wouldn't know, to be fair, so I can confirm it is the 1st of January.
Okay, that's fine.
Do you mind if I clarify? Sorry, I just want to make sure what page you're talking about, because you said page, was it 19 and then page 10?
Linda,
kind of background noise there, sorry.
No, it's fine. I think, but Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, I think he then moved on to talk about from pages 21 onwards, and he wanted to check what financial periods that they actually fell into. Could you ask Grant if that's okay, or if he would need any more information?
That's perfect, thank you.
Right, smashing. Okay. Sorry, Linda, you've still got your hand up. For legacy hands. Michael McGlynn's never going to live that down. Anyway, so can I have a seconder then, please?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Eric. Right, okay, so moving on then. So we'll move on to item 3B. So this is our housing capital programme, pages 27 to 32. And this is Jackie, then followed by Derek.
Thank you, Chair. So same time period being covered in this report, but this time it's the Housing Capital Programme. Again, section 5 covers the financial implications, and we are reporting our programme for the year at £48.172 million. Again, we're covering our expected outturn for the year at section 5.2, and we are reporting that we expect to fully spend the budget this year. And as at period 10, which is the 1st of January, we are showing a spend of just over £27 million. If I take you then onto the appendices, on page 29, we have Appendix A, and that shows the funding for the capital programme for housing this year. And again, the majority of our programme is funded from grant from the Scottish Government, but also from the housing revenue account that contributes towards capital projects. The graph on page 30 shows the expected profile for the year and how we've performed against that, obviously recognising that the original budget for 2021 was set before the pandemic hit. So obviously our performance against our original budget is a lot less than expected. On page 31, we move on to the physical progress, and Derek can take us through that.
Okay, the physical progress of the Housing Capital Programme to the 1st of January then, we have 6 projects behind programme at that point in time. The first one, page 32. The first one is Smileham area phase 2, the resurfacing works that are going on up there. The project slipped due to issues with the surrounding trees that we've come up against and owner-occupier issues. The next is Castlefield Gardens, the sheltered housing complex. It was a ventilation upgrade, so obviously that means going into the individual flats, and that's been delayed due to COVID restrictions at that point. Edelwood deck access blocks, the external works there has been delayed due to COVID restrictions, where it impacts on entering houses. And Kilncroft Terrace, Douglas, we've still got an issue with the supply chain delaying the completion of the fencing. At Park Crescent, the sheltered housing, it was a communal area upgrade, so that's been restricted now due to COVID. And East Main Street, Rutherglen, the sheltered housing complex, although it was an external fabric upgrade, we've been impacted by weather at that project, so that's delayed that project as well. That's all, Chair.
Excellent, thank you very much, Derek and Jackie. I'll just open it up for questions. No? You're getting off easy. Right, okay, I'll just look for a seconder then.
I second it.
Grant, Eric just pipped you to the post there.
Grant can have this one, honestly, it's fine.
Give it to Grant. Grant, you can have this one. You and Eric can fight it out after, right? So,
Okay,
Grant's
who's
getting
next? Who's next to approve then?
What's that, Walter?
Who are we going to have to approve next then? No fighting.
I'll go next.
Okay.
Thanks, Jared. Okay, we'll move on to our next item then. So it's number 4. So this is your revenue budget monitoring. So that is pages 33 to 52. And I'll let Jackie take us through it.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start by saying this is a very lengthy document, but thankfully we have we have an executive summary. I'll let you decide if it's simple, which, if okay with you, Chair, I'll take the group through the executive summary and, okay, and the appendices. And of course, I'm happy to take any questions. Most of the content of this report we have seen before in some guises. As you know, the revenue budget monitoring reports are quite repetitive. So hopefully the executive summary will give us enough to get a clear picture of where we're at. Of course, at any point, if anybody wants to ask me a question, please do so. So this is the revenue budget side of the house, and it's taken us again to the 1st of January. However, this is the first report where we're showing our probable outturn. And again, as we all know, we're long in the tooth in this meeting, that the probable outturn is the exercise that we carry out just around Christmas time to get as near final position for the year as we possibly can. Obviously, the challenges of COVID this year have made it perhaps more challenging than before, but we have done that exercise and we will now monitor ourselves against it. So if I can take you to page 34, and section 4 gives an executive summary of the rest of the paper, and it does cover COVID and the spend for COVID. It covers our resource spend position in terms of our probable outturn and what we expect to be at the end of the year on resource spend. And I'll call it normal resource spend without COVID. And it also covers reserves and our contributions to reserves that Executive Committee considered last week and approved. So firstly, at section 4.2, we're covering COVID. And at each element of the executive summary, there is a reference there to where you can get more details in the report. So obviously section 5 covers COVID in more detail. But you may remember that in the last reports that have come to the forum, we were reporting an expected projected overspend on COVID costs of £4.657 million. So that was after we took all the expected costs and financial implications of COVID and took off the element of funding that we've already been provided. So 4.657 was the estimated position. However, since that point, we had been advised of further funding for lost income of 2.755 million. So that has then revised our shortfall due to COVID to £1.9 million. And there's a table there just at section 4.4 that summarises that position, and you can see there the £4.657 million that we've previously reported as our expected COVID position. And then you can see the loss of income from the government, loss of income funding from the government of 2.755 million, getting us to a shortfall in COVID funding of £1.9 million. So that's COVID. Then we have the other side of our budget this year, which is our normal spend. And you can see this table here is then reporting that our expected spend from resources is an overspend, that brackets is an overspend of £441,000. I'll cover that in a bit more detail in a second. And we also have our position on council tax recovery, and that's showing a positive position, an over recovery of council tax of £2.6 million. So if we take those three factors together, we've got a shortfall because of COVID of £1.9 million. We'll overspend in our department spend of £440,000, but we have an over recovery of income from council tax of £2.6 million. If we net those three figures off, we actually come to an overall underspend for the council of £261,000. If I go over to page 35, I'll just give you a little bit more information on the department, the resource side of our position, and that's at 4.7. So we mentioned in that table a second ago £441,000 of an overspend, and that's predominantly around our education resources. We're showing a £308,000 overspend in education. Now, when you consider the size of that budget, that's a relatively small overspend position. And then at section 4.8, under what we call corporate items, there is a second element of overspend of £117,000. And what that primarily relates to is a commitment that we have to pass over funds that we've collected from second home council tax, and we're obliged to pass that over to the housing revenue account. So whilst that's shown as a overspend position, when I come to our council tax position, we actually get income in, obviously, from those owners of those second homes that pay us council tax. So that helps offset that overspend. And then at section 4.9, we summarise the position on council tax. So the table I showed you a second ago did show that we showed an over recovery in council tax of £2.6 million. Now that's made up of a number of elements that all feature as part of our council tax figure. So the first one is council tax reduction scheme. So this is the benefit that we pay out to those that are eligible for council tax reduction. And we have at the moment an underspend, or at the time of writing this report, we had an underspend in that line of £810,000. Now, what I should say at this point is that this was at, the 1st of January. And it's important to remember that when these estimates were done, it was just prior to us going back into a higher level of restriction. And we are very aware, particularly around benefits, that it's a very fluid position. So it is an area that we are monitoring closely, and we might not see that level of underspend by the end of the year. Another point I'd make about that line is that we have had extra funding in this year around Council Tax Reduction Scheme. So whilst it might seem unusual that we've got an underspend in benefits payments, particularly in these times, that underspend is really reflective of the fact that we had a budget in place and we've been given more funding from the government to supplement that. We are spending more on benefits, but we get more funding in to cover that. We also, in terms of council tax, had recovered more in terms of second homes than we had expected. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that we've got a commitment to pay some of that over to our HRA balance budget. The rest of our council tax over recovery is primarily around arrears collection. So even despite the challenges of the last year, we still are able to collect some arrears from previous years. So £620,000 of arrears collection over recovery. That isn't as high as we've seen in previous years. So we are seeing an impact of the pandemic on our arrears collection, but we're still fortunate that we're still at a level that exceeds the budget that had been set. And then finally, the charges that we make for empty properties were higher than we'd expected by £400,000. And then just that point at section 4.10 that I mentioned a second ago, that these outturns were early December before the stricter Tier 4 lockdown conditions were put in place. Just to finish off the executive summary, at section 411, we've got transfers to reserves. And every year as part of our looking at our budget, we have to identify if there's any budget that we have that we've actually committed or we're required to carry forward into the next financial year. And that will be for things like any specific funding that we've got for a particular project or a policy area that we're required to carry that forward to complete that work or that policy intention. So there was a proposed transfer to the Executive Committee last week of £7.574 million. And there is an appendix that details those down, each proposed transfer, which I'll cover in a second. In addition to that £7.5 million, £3 million transfer was also approved by the Executive Committee last week. And as I reported to the forum last time, this was in relation to contributions towards our insurance fund, our winter maintenance fund, and our strategic waste fund. And that will help allow them to contribute towards those costs in the next financial year. So before I move on to the appendices, Chair, I'd be quite happy if anybody has any questions on what I've reported at the moment.
Does anybody have any questions so far? Just carry on, Jackie.
Baffled everybody. If I go to the appendices then, so and again, hopefully most of these will be familiar in some form to members. So on page 43 we have appendix 1, and what this is showing is our expected COVID spend and our funding. So the top lines are showing our expected spend across departments on COVID, over costs, over lost income, because that obviously has an impact for the council. There's some spend that we know departments haven't made through the period of the pandemic, so that's a positive position. And then we have offsetting that is a whole load of funding sources that we've received in this year. And there's as you can imagine, there's a fair number of different pots of money that we've been given for certain policy intent and also for general COVID costs. At the bottom of the table, we can see savings not achieved, and that reflects some elements of cost where we were expecting to make savings in the year, but we haven't managed to do that. So that is a real financial impact for the council. And then obviously we have our leisure trust that are also experiencing, pressures because of the pandemic and their facilities being closed. So we're including that as a pressure that the council will be looking to manage overall. And that gives us that £1.9 million of a pressure from COVID at this point in time.
Can I ask a question, Jackie? Sorry,
sure.
Apologies. I think that Appendix 1's really good because I think it's very clear. Do you know what I wanted to ask with regards to the shortfall from South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture
Yes.
Trust? I'm just thinking about things like Stuartfield Lock. They've got obviously the phosphate that they put into the water, so it's a saving because you've not put the phosphate in, but it then turns out not to be, because then effectively you've probably got to get rid of the blue-green algae. You could take another 5 years to get it back to where it's at, because there's 1 year we've not been able to do what we needed to do with it. Are things like that counted in the shortfall, or is the shortfall just loss of revenue?
No, the shortfall is their bottom line position. So there'll be a lot of spend that they're not having to make. They have staff, because they are a separate legal entity, they're able to put staff on furlough.
Yeah.
So whilst the staff are still employed, the Leisure Trust is able to get income in from furlough for those staff. Obviously, that's something that the council hasn't been able to do, but the Leisure Trust has. There will be costs associated with running facilities that they've not made. And then there's obviously the big hit that is lost income. So I'm not close enough to the detail, Chair, about the particulars about phosphate in the loch. But any spend that's not made will factor as part of what is offset against their loss of income.
No, that's great. You've been very clear, because what that means is that they'll have saved on the phosphate this year, so that's a saving, but it will be a knock-on effect in other years. But that's just something for us to then just take into account for moving forward. So that's okay. You were clear, so thank you. Anyway, yep. I interrupted you because you were like just talking through Appendix 1, so it's just in case I've made you lose your flow.
Not at all. I think I'd completed on Appendix 1. So if I move to page 44, which is Appendix 2, or the start of Appendix 2, and these are the very detailed but informative if you're looking for a particular resource. It shows each individual resource and their services, and it shows their budget position and their spend to date. Now, we actually have, normally these reports would have one version of this, but because we have a position now where we are transferring money to reserves, we show the position before transfers to reserves and then after transfers to reserves. So it just makes it a little bit more weighty in terms of the papers that we've got here. So that first page is before transfers to reserves. And continuing that on page 45, it's the same position, so before transfers to reserves, but broken down over spend type rather than department spend. So you can see employee costs, property costs, etc. So you can see that there. And then when we go on to, in fact, I've probably given you a bum steer there. When we go on to page 47, which is Appendix 4A, you can see the position after transfers to reserves. So just if you're looking for that. Now I have skipped by a very important appendix, which is Appendix 3, and that's on page 46. And this is the transfer to reserves that I mentioned a second ago. So here you have the full details of the transfers to reserves that the Executive Committee approved, and they total £10.574 million, including the £3 million that I mentioned earlier, the contributions towards for winter maintenance, for insurance fund, and for the strategic waste fund. So if I was to pick out the main items that were approved, probably in the education section, so that's almost halfway down the page. We've got pupil equity fund. So we know that that's a particular fund that's for a specific purpose, and it covers the school year rather than the financial year. So it is appropriate that we would carry the unspent element of that into the new financial year that will allow spend between April and June. And also we have funds that we received for the rollout of early years extended hours, the 1140 hours programme, and that funding that we haven't spent this year will carry forward to allow that programme to continue. Right, just move on past Appendix 4, which I covered a second ago. When we get into Appendix 5, you can see the breakdown of our COVID spend. Sorry, Chair. The COVID spend that we covered earlier in that Appendix 1, which was the high-level summary. So a fair bit of detail there around each of the elements of spend that we're incurring around COVID. And then Appendix 6, which is on page 52, is just our housing revenue account position. And that just shows our monitoring statement, which shows for each of our spend lines and housing revenue account, the variances and explanations for that. So I know there's a fair bit of detail in those appendices as well, but again, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okie dokie. I'll just open up the floor then. Walter?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just me doing my repeating as I usually do about the play park that was removed as part of the 1140 hours build programme. I still haven't had anything personally that tells me what's going to happen to that play park that was knocked down. I was just wondering if that was part of those reserves. I know you can't answer that one, Jackie, but I'm still looking for an answer on when and where are they going to replace that park.
Yeah, so if I can take that, I know that Derek's left the meeting now. Yeah. I think maybe in previous meetings Derek had more information than I did. Yeah, more information than I had. So I'll take that back if that's okay, Councillor.
And that's fine.
On that. Thank you.
Before I forget.
Thank you.
I'm just thinking, I never thanked Derek. Derek, we thank you, even though you've now left the meeting. Poor Derek. We'll make up to him next time. Okay, Eric?
Just to give you some reassurance, Jackie, it's not that you've baffled us, quite the opposite, really. This has followed through, obviously, for a number of periods now, and it's been building incrementally. And I spent a lot of time looking at this before this meeting, trying to follow it all through, but it all is very logical and clear. So I think that's hopefully that's the same for everybody, but certainly for me, the reason why I'm not asking lots of difficult and detailed questions. So there you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and I'll pass those thanks on to Lorraine and her team, because it's them that write this, hopefully in the manner that people can understand. Well, so thank you.
I didn't mean it necessarily directly to you, but you were presenting it.
No, not at all. Definitely Lorraine and her team.
As Jackie eloquently said, we're all getting long in the tooth with these reports now.
So, does anybody get any other questions? No? Okay. I'm looking for a seconder. Is it going to be you, Jared?
I'll second it.
Way. Right, okay. Thank you. Grant, you get pipped again, mate. Sorry about that. Right, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to move on to item number 5. But see, before I move on to item number 5, I want to ask a quick question. So, Grant, I noticed on the last report, and it's based on the conversation that we had at the start, and I'd never thought about this before, so I'll apologise in advance. That was really hefty with the pages, and like me listening while following and going from number to number. Jackie was very clear, so we all knew where we were going, but it kind of thought came to me, would it be more helpful to you if you had 2 screens? So you had one screen in front of you that would have your papers up on it, instead of you having to look to your iPad, and then you had the other screen with everybody pinned on it?
Unfortunately, technology won't allow for that. It's a bit too early for technology, so I have read through the papers. So when you're talking, I can quickly refer to it, and I know, at which place in the paper you're talking about. But if you're talking about 2 screens, unfortunately, technology won't allow for that. And I'm quite used to be honest, referring to the iPad. It's very helpful to give me the page number and the appendix number, so I can quickly refer to that. I just quickly scroll through my iPad. If I didn't have the number, then I would be, I'd be behind and I'd be struggling to find the place. But I think, you know, if you're talking about the sections and appendix and the points, then it makes it more easier for me to just quickly refer to that. And I have been used to doing that for years and years, to be honest. Through university, I had to do that as well. So I have adjusted over time. So, no, I know what you're talking about, to have two screens. And it sounds like a very good idea, but I don't think it would work with the technology, to be honest.
No, that's fine. It was just something I hadn't thought about before, and then I thought if that was something that would help.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for thinking about that anyway.
That's fine. And so we'll make a point of continuing to say the page numbers, like, you know, saying whether it's what appendix it is, pointing out to what a number, and if there's anything else we're missing, would you just interrupt and just say, like, stop?
Monique, I normally use two screens.
Don't you worry, I will.
And it's very helpful. But unfortunately, my Mac crashed. So thanks to everybody who's been going through the program with me, because I wouldn't have been able to follow it had it not been so good.
Right, okay, that's fine. Okay, it's just to give everybody a fair chance. Right, okay, moving on swiftly then, because I'm aware that, Lorraine, your report is always like, you know, us going back and forth. So good luck with that, Lorraine. So anyway, I'll take you on then, everybody. So we're on the last item then for monitoring. It's number 5. So this is the detailed resource analysis. I'll hand you over to Lorraine. It's pages 53 to 138. And you were just going to pick out certain ones over a certain value to go through with us, weren't you? Okay, yeah. I'll hand you over to Lorraine.
Thanks, Chair. Yep, this is the detailed resource analysis. So again, we've got the 5 resources in the housing revenue account, and as Chair said, it starts on page 53, but the substantive content, which is classed as Appendix A there for community and enterprise resources, is on page 55. As Jackie's explained to you, we've gone through the probable outturn exercise. So for the first time this year, the greyed out box in the middle of the table, in the middle of the page rather, shows you the annual forecast for the resource. So it's sitting at 9.169 of an overspend there, with the vast majority of that being COVID expenditure. You can see the COVID line itself sitting 5.701, just above the 9.169 on the right hand side of the greyed out box, but also included is loss of income within the resource, and also spend areas that haven't taken place. So overall,
sorry, can I interrupt? You're going too fast for me to pick up the statistics. I'm really sorry.
Okay, no, that's all right.
Thank you.
Lorraine, will you just go back to the start then, please?
I will do. So we're in the middle of page 55, and the greyed out box in the centre of the page shows you the probable outturn position. So if I start from the left-hand side, you have the annual budget, you have the forecast for the year before transfers to reserves, you've got the annual forecast after transfers to reserves, the annual forecast variance before transfers, and then the annual forecast variance after transfers, and that culminates in the resource position at the bottom of 9.169 million. And all I was explaining in a bit more detail, and it's maybe too much detail at this point, is the expenditure that we have for COVID, and that's the vast majority of the spend that the resource has. On the right hand side of that page, we've got the position at period 10, which is the 1st of January, and you can see the overspend for the resource is 6.227 million. Again, including the COVID position, but that's before any transfers are made to reserves. Is that okay for that page?
Yeah, I think, do you know something? I think you're right. It's like, it's hard because you're trying to get all the information out, and but I think, do you know something? Just take your time, because we've got 2 hours, so it's all good.
I'll keep you for the full 2 hours. I'll take you up on that.
Well, we'll need a coffee break.
Absolutely. Okay, so we'll move on to the next page. And this is probably a bit easier to follow, because Jackie's already taken you through the high level position for the resources. And this section really is just the normal variance explanations that we're used to. But because we've got the probable outturn, normally a whole heap of variances come through the woodwork that we maybe hadn't seen before. So in community and enterprise, I think there's quite a few, a significant number, probably about 30, I sat and counted them. But a lot of them are very minor, and they're minor variances on minor budget lines. So what I would be looking to do with the Chair's agreement is just focus on the significant variances that are above about 100,000, and I think there's about half a dozen of those.
Yeah, good idea.
I think if I can take you to, I'm writing down earlier what page we're on and I've lost my place reference. I think the first of the significant ones is on page 60. So that's transport and plant, and within fleet services, within their fuel line, we've got an underspend there of 771,000, and that's all sitting within fleet environmental and projects, and that underspend is mainly due to less demand for fuel due to COVID, which is offset by an under recovery of income because they recharge the fuel back out to other departments in the council.
Okay, so that was great. So that was page 60.
Yeah. The next one, our next couple are on page 62. So again, within fleet services, again, fuel line, again within transport and plant, but this is facilities, streets and waste and grounds. 136 under, again, resulting from COVID, and also a result of the reduction in the number of vehicles within the street service. And then below that, we've got fleet and environmental and projects, 218,000 of an underspend, and that's due to lower fuel consumption within the pool cars and passenger services, again, offset by an under recovery of income. So that's within their own resource, if you like, their own recharge in terms of the resources spend. If I can take you to page 63, within payments to contractors, payments to the trading services contractor as was, we've got a roads overspend there, mainly due to increased reactive maintenance works and rechargeable works. And at the top of the next page, page 64, again, payments to contractors, we've got COVID-19 expenditure of 155,000, and that's mainly due to traffic management for civic community sites, again, because of COVID. And I think the final one, I think she says, oh no, there's another two. At the bottom of page 65, we've got a roads over recovery there of 138,000. That's mainly due to higher levels of rechargeable works and is offset by additional expenditure, sorry. And at the top of page 67, the last couple, we've got a roads under recovery there from capital, and that's due to reduction in the level of works that have been undertaken so far. And the final one, within recharges departments of the authority, again within facilities, streets, waste and grounds, we have an over recovery of 247,000 there, and that over recovery is due to the net effect of the recovery of nursery meals from education resources being greater than anticipated, but it's partly offset by an under recovery of income within the ground service. So it's a net position for that service area. And that's all for that resource in terms of the more sizable variances.
That is great, thank you very much. That was my iPad, which was my other screen that just fell over there really noisily, so sorry about that. Anyway, that was great, so thank you for going through that. Does anybody get any questions for this part of the resource? Eric?
Yeah, not really a question, just more a comment. This huge underspend in fuel must make a huge difference to our green footprint or our carbon footprint. It must be phenomenal. Wonder if we could think of a way to carry this on for another year or two.
No.
I'm not serious, by the way.
Good.
So
we're just burning it all up in the house through the gas bills.
I absolutely believe that.
Not really much you can say to that, isn't there? Not Roosevelt's not saying anything. Okay, so no other questions for this section? Right, okay, that's grand. Right, we'll move on then, Lorraine.
Okay, education resources then starts on page 73. So again, you've got the same presentation. You have the probable outturn position in the greyed out box in the middle. So the far right hand column shows the 9.917 of a cost for education. And you can see the COVID line there is 9.921 million. It's been the cost of COVID, so obviously that's virtually all of the overspend position that they're predicting. On the right hand side, in the white area of the table, bottom right hand corner, you can see the position at period 10, which is 5.757 million of an overspend. Again, the vast majority being COVID, and that's their position at the 1st of January. So again, if I can take you over the page, for education, there's only a few new variances for the resource that's come through actually. The first one is on page 75, and funnily enough, talking about electricity fuel costs. So electricity, 249,000 cost of COVID-19, and that's due to increased ventilation requirements within schools in terms of keeping the windows open and allowing ventilation, and obviously trying to keep the classrooms as warm as they can. Materials, apparatus and equipment schools, 282 of an overspend there, and that's due to the additional expenditure reflecting the growth in pupil numbers. In terms of The next one, page 77, we have within the pupil equity funding line there, schools are showing 1.884 of an underspend. That relates to grant funding received for the current academic year rather than financial year. You'll be aware of this. This is the way that the government gives us the money every year. Lockdown restrictions have also had an impact on the ability of schools to spend in the current year, but they'll be carrying forward any underspend to use in the April to June school session. And that'll be part of the transfers to reserves that Jackie mentioned in the earlier report. The next variance for education, if I can tell, oh, there isn't any more. There you go. That's me finished for education.
Well done. Okay, any questions? Jared?
Yeah, just in page 76 with the materials, apparatus and equipment, the overspend is due to additional expenditure reflecting the growth in pupil numbers. Is that not, do we not know like how many pupil numbers we're expecting and have to budget for that? I just don't understand that one.
I think it's a good question.
It's a very obvious question, and rightly so. It's a historic budget pressure that we've got there. So as pupil numbers increase, there hasn't been an injection of or transfer of budget into that line, but it is managed overall within the education resources budget. So it's not just in year we didn't know how many pupils we've got. It's been something that's been over a number of years.
Is that okay, Jared?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you just think, yeah, this is the amount of money that we expect to need to equip the children, you know, so this is what we need, you know, and we should be able to just give them it rather than, yeah, asking for more, I guess.
The spend is made, if I can give that comfort, the spend is still being made for the number of children. It's just probably a an imbalance in the budget. It is still spent. It's not that we're restricting the actual spend. It's just reported as an overspend.
Yeah, but should we not be just putting that in, like budgeting for that, rather than mixed fiddling things about?
Yeah, and yeah, that's again a good question. But what we tend to do is just manage the budget over the bottom line position. So that's why we see a number of kind of overspends and underspends across the board.
Yeah.
Is that okay then, Jared?
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, we do that for a number of things. This sort of technique, I guess, like the transport costs for the children is often very much over budget sort of thing each year. So I just kind of, yeah, it's fine. That's the way it's done. That's the way it's done.
You're still allowed to ask the questions. Does anybody else have any questions? Well, I've got one. See on page 77. I'm just thinking, see for the schools, and it's the 71k under, and it's the underspend relates to expenditure on the sanitary products being lower than anticipated. Is that because school children aren't in, therefore they don't have access to the sanitary wear, therefore we need to be looking to make sure that there isn't period poverty and it's getting addressed? Or is it because we thought that there would be far more of an uptake and it isn't, therefore we would be better spending money on pencils and jotters?
My understanding, and if it's okay with you, Chair, I will take this back and ask the service, but my understanding is that there was a stock of product that hadn't yet been used. Now that's not to say that there's no uptake, it was just about the stock levels that we had. And I do believe that there are measures in place to make sure that period poverty is still being addressed, that the fact that children aren't at school isn't a barrier to them being able to access these period products. But as I say, I'm not close enough to the delivery of that policy, so I'll take that back and get an answer for you if that's okay.
No, I think that's perfect. It wasn't actually something that I thought you would know the answer straight off the cuff, because we went through the papers and we never thought of that one. It was just there, and it kind of put it prevalent to the front of my head to think that's actually really essential just in case. Anyway, sorry, Jared, I can see you've got your hands up again.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that came up before, and I think it was that it wasn't been used as much as what they predicted it would be. But I think
Okay.
Jackie's right.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any other contributions they want to like chuck in at this point? No? Okay, we're good to go. Lorraine, back to you. So what page are we on again? Hold on. Is it 87?
87, yeah.
Right.
So finance and corporate showing a position of 4.787, again in the greyed out box in the middle of your screen, and that position is the variance after transfer, so that's an overspend of 4787. And as at the 1st of January, period 10, the bottom right hand corner of your page, you can see the 3.876 over, and that's the resources position at that point. Moving on to finance and corporate's variance explanations, again there's about half a dozen. Again, I would pick up in the more sizable ones over 100,000. So at the top of the first page, page 88, within basic salaries, we've got an overspend there within admin, legal and licensing, and that's really due to turnover of staff being less than anticipated across the service area, and I think we've seen that across a few resources, and certainly seen that in the reports that personnel have given to committees as well over the last year. On the next page, page 89, within electricity contract, we've got an overspend there within COVID, and that's reflecting the winter fuel payments made to individuals, and they will be funded by the COVID-19 grant for the Scottish Government. So there's probably a couple of unusual COVID lines, if you like, that you're seeing within finance and corporate this year that you wouldn't normally see. It is because of COVID, and we're kind of holding them and managing them centrally. What else have we got? At the top of page 91, we have another two variances there. So with other supplies and services, just over £1 million there in terms of COVID. So this is another similar payment, £100 winter payments made to provide support to eligible families, again funded by a COVID grant from the government. And the next one down, 610,000 of an overspend there in preschool meals, again reflecting the expenditure in relation to COVID. That's the school meals covering the Christmas holidays and the early part of the January lockdown, and also to children who are self-isolating on an ongoing basis. And again, funded by Scottish Government grant. The top of page 92, we have an overspend there within communications and strategy, and that reflects higher than budgeted meal costs and is offset by an over-recovery of income. And administration, legal and licensing, an underspend there reflecting the reduction in the uptake of grants to volunteer organisations. Over the page, on page 93, we have an overspend there, again attributed to COVID for private individuals, payments to private individuals, and that relates to payments made to provide financial support to housing tenants. And that is the final one for finance and corporate that I would highlight.
Okay, thank you very much, Lorraine. So any questions? No. Right, got off easy with that one, Lorraine.
Did. Thank you.
Oh, no,
Okay.
no.
Right.
Jazz on.
Just
Go
in
on,
that-
go on.
Just in that last one, the
What page are you on, Jared?
page 93, was it? The last one. Private individuals, the overspend relates to payments made to provide financial support to housing tenants. Is that financial support, are we expected to receive that back from the tenants? Is that?
I can answer that.
Good.
That was part of a range of proposals that we had put forward. I think there was a members' briefing on this, and it was part of, I think it was called either financial and securities funding that the government gave us, or it may have been called flexible funding. I think there was kind of two pots of money that came in that were similar. And one of the proposals was to put £100,000 into a tenant sustainability fund. So it's a payment. It's not about expecting them to pay it back. It's not a loan.
Okay, that's cool.
If you're looking for more information on that, I can get the members' briefing sent out to you again.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I'll do that too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jackie. Does anybody else have any other questions for that resource? No. Okay, Lorraine, we will move on. I'm like fingers and thumbs, the pages. Is it page 105?
105, yep.
Okay, sorted.
Housing and technical resources then. So again, for the first time, we've got the probable outturn information in the greyed out box at the centre. So the resource is showing an overspend of 1.147. Included in that is 1.165 for COVID. So there's a slight underspend elsewhere within the resource area. At period 10, so 1st of January, we're showing an overspend of 491,000, and that's the bottom right-hand corner of that page, page 105. In terms of the resource, there's a small number of variances, so I'll go through them. They start on page 106, and the second one down, property services, we're showing an overspend there in terms of basic salaries for manual workers. The variance reflects the current level of trade operatives required to meet service demands. Over the page, on page 107, within housing services, we've got a 50,000 underspend there relating to change in the profile of temporary accommodation, and also better than expected collection rates for rental income. And that's within our rent written off for bad periods. So that's basically a cost, and they're underspending in that, so that's a good position. What else have we got? At the top of page 109, we have mobile phones and overspend there, 32,000 of that relating to COVID, and it reflects additional costs incurred to allow staff to work from home and also ensure that the customer contact access is maintained during the restrictions. Over the page, on page 110, property services are showing an under recovery there in terms of rental income of 421,000, and that reflects changes to the level of rental income collectible from the portfolio that they manage. And the next one down, 340 of an over recovery there relating to income for the provision of additional temporary accommodation to meet the increased demands of COVID, and that partially offsets the additional property and payment to other bodies expenditure incurred above within that service area. And that's all for housing and technical resources.
Stephen, sorry, what would you like to say?
Could you go back to that last part? That was really quick, so I didn't pick all of that information up.
So is that page 110?
It was...
That's the last two vacancies.
The very last two variances were 110, but Stephen, do you need it back further?
No, just that last one that you explained, please.
The last one is 340 of an over recovery there. So that's within rental income within housing and technical resources. And it's showing an over recovery relating to income for the provision of additional temporary accommodation to meet the increased demand that they've incurred as a result of COVID-19. And it partially offsets additional property and payments to other bodies expenditure above. So we've incurred more expenditure, but we've also got an over recovery of income. Does that help?
That's great, thank you.
Good.
Okay. Any questions for that resource? Okay.
Okay.
Yep, just move on, Lorraine, that's fine.
Housing revenue account then is on page 117, Appendix E, and there's only two new variances within the service area. One is second one down within property costs, but a grounds maintenance overspend there relating to grounds maintenance works, obviously, which are a demand-led service, and they're looking to manage that within their overall budget. And then housing, rent-free accommodation, 74,000 over. That's at the bottom of that page, and that reflects the volume of discretionary rent periods awarded during the year, which again is demand-led.
Okay.
That's all HRA.
Any questions for HRA for that resource? Right, okay, sorted. Lorraine, do you just want to move on to social work then on page 123?
Social work then, page 123 is Appendix F, and again we've got the greyed out box in the middle showing an overspend of 379 for the resource. 370 of that is in relation to COVID, and you can see that in the right hand column of the greyed out box. And then on the far right hand side of your page, bottom line figure, the £260,000 overspend is what the resource are presenting to us at accounting period 10, which is the 1st of January. So in terms of variances for social work, there are only a couple of new ones because they tend to be very detailed as they go through the year in terms of the variance explanations. So we've got page 126. We have a repairs and maintenance overspend of 329,000 within COVID. This is the cost of operating the PPE hub and the deliveries of PPE to all care providers in South Lanarkshire. over a number of pages to page 129. Again, within adults and older people, we have 136,000 of an underspend there. Within other transport costs, it's the top variance on that page. And that reflects the current demand in respect of transporting adults to daycare, obviously, again, through the pandemic. And I think that's all for social work, actually, in terms of new and substantial variances. As I say, they tend to give a lot of detail throughout the year, so there's not too many new ones this period.
Yeah, no, that's great. Eric, what you had your hand up for asking a question?
I do. On page 126, repairs and maintenance 336. Why does the cost of operating and maintaining a PPE hub come under repairs and maintenance? It doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
That's a fine question.
I'll take that one. It's a COVID cost. Okay. Now, that's not an excuse or a reason, but it was something that was introduced when obviously COVID hit, and we would have just selected a cost centre and a subjective code, which is how we hold it in the ledger, to capture those costs. And I don't think there'd have been any other reason than it could go in there. There's no real logic for why it's under repairs and maintenance. It could be under property costs, it could be under a number of things, but it will be capturing all of those costs in the one place. Bearing in mind that those costs are reimbursed from the Scottish Government through our mobilisation plan. I think I've talked to the group about that before, that all of the costs that we're incurring through social care in relation to COVID are reimbursed through the Scottish Government. So it's probably just because it's a place to hold those costs. It's not necessarily directly linked to repairs and maintenance.
So was a rolling of a dice involved in choosing that?
Not at all.
Quite
not
possibly.
Not at all.
Okay, no problem. Cheers.
Any other questions? Anybody want to roll some dice? Eric? Troublemaker?
I'm not a troublemaker. Not at all. Never have been.
Just occasionally. Anyway, no, that's great. Right, so no, is there seriously then no other questions? Right, okay, so well, that was our number 5. That was our last item for monitoring. Can I get a seconder that's who's not seconded a report?
We all have.
Right, who's first to get their hand up then for seconding
I'll second you.
Ah, you never put your hand up, so you're ruled out. What, Eric?
Back to the beginning. Walter was first, so
Fine, we'll let
we've all
Walter
had to go. It must be his turn.
Right, okay, Walter, you get to, it's like the lucky draw. It's like, well done, Walter. Today you get to second the report. Okay, that's lovely. Well, there's no other urgent business, so I'll just thank you all for attending and close off the meeting and ask Carol to stop recording and wish you all well. Have a nice day for the rest of it.